Welcome to today's virtual gallery talk with artist Jessica Houston. Yeah, at a time when we might be feeling disconnected, it's a nice opportunity to gather together, see some new faces, and spend the afternoon learning about a new, hopefully new to us artist. So, like I said, before I turn things over to Jessica, I want to just briefly walk you through the space if you haven't had a chance to come into the gallery. And to mention a few upcoming virtual gallery talks. So please mark your calendars for October 21st at 6:30 in the evening. We are bringing back an Gettysburg College alum, Emily Francisco, who's a curatorial assistant at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. And then also on November 12th, newly added to the calendar, a talk by Professor Jerry Philogene, who's a professor of American Studies at Dickinson College, and she'll be giving a talk on art, the body, and identity politics. So these, the Zoom links will be available on the college's events calendar. So now I am going to just briefly share my screen with you all. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. So so Jessica Houston's work is included in the current Schmucker Art Gallery exhibition, I Beseech You, Women, Art, Politics, and Power. And again, if you haven't had a chance to come into the gallery, the work that we have by Jessica is on display here on the right as you kind of enter into the main space. We have 4 photographs and 3 objects on display. And I'm just really thrilled that she accepted our invitation to be a part of this show. If you happen to be a current Gettysburg College student or our staff or faculty, you are welcome to come into the gallery Tuesdays through Saturdays, 10 to 4. The accompanying exhibition catalog features essays by Gettysburg College students, and these were last year. And I just want to mention that Jessica was fantastic with one of my students, Ben Wilson, who was charged with researching and writing about Jessica's work. And Jessica and Ben corresponded over email last fall, and I'm just really so grateful for Jessica's willingness and generosity to answer all of Ben's questions and engage with Ben's research and writing. And if you happen to be on campus, you're welcome to pick up a copy of the exhibition catalog. If you are not, write your address in the chat box and I'd be happy to mail you a copy. The exhibition coincides with the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, and all of the artwork included in the exhibition, Jessica's work as well as work by Kara Walker, Allison Sarr, Judy Chicago, and you can see some of their works here. This is Kara Walker, prints by Allison Sarr, and embroideries by feminist artist Judy Chicago, in addition to about 16 other artists. The work doesn't just celebrate voices of women in a democracy, but all of the work acknowledges the continued fight for equal rights, social justice, and an action about climate change. I want to thank the co-sponsors of the exhibition and the related programs, the Department of Africana Studies, the Art and Art History Department, Peace and Justice Studies, Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Environmental Studies, the Office of Multicultural Engagement, and the Women's and LGBTQIA Research Center. I also want to give special thanks to Florence Journey, professor of French here at Gettysburg College, for introducing me to Jessica. Florence saw Jessica's work in Montreal about 2 years ago, and I'm so grateful for her really excellent eye and for helping her interest in bringing Jessica's work to Gettysburg. Based in Montreal, artist Jessica Houston has traveled from pole to pole using photography, painting, oral histories, and objects to evoke entanglements of nature and culture. Her multimedia projects often include site-specific oral histories that amplify the memory of a place and evoke the land as a living process. I'm just gonna see. She has worked on projects involving communities and their relationship to their environments in the Canadian Arctic, Antarctica, Greenland, Iceland, and Italy. And although, I just want to mention, although many artists have had exhibitions put on hold during the pandemic, Jessica has been remarkably busy and successful this year. Jessica, who received her MA from Columbia University and her BA from SUNY Albany, has recently had work acquired by the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, and her work will be shown in an exhibition there titled Ecology in 2021. She also has upcoming exhibitions at the University of Northern Colorado, the Arcticum Science Center Museum in Finland, and Vanderbilt University in Tennessee. Earlier this year, she exhibited work at the Samick Art Museum at Bucknell University, and she has participated in so many other exhibitions, lectures, and artist residencies than I have time to list here. But I want to just mention a few others: the New Jersey Museum of Contemporary Art, Governor's Island in New York, the Hyde Collection Museum in Glens Falls, New York, and the Latimer House Museum in New York. And I also want to give special thanks to the Art Gallery in Montreal for helping to facilitate the loan of Jessica's work. I want to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. We will have time for questions and answers at the end. So if you prefer to not be on video when we do our question and answer session beginning about 4:30, 4:35, please feel free to put questions in the chat box throughout the talk. When Jessica has finished her presentation, I will be helping to moderate those questions and reading those questions and comments in the chat box. So don't hesitate to comment throughout. And then finally, please join me in giving a virtual hand clap and a warm welcome to Jessica Houston.
Buddy.
And Jessica now will be sharing her screen, and I'll be muting myself. So
first, I also just wanted to say thank you to Shannon and also to Florence Journey, and also Shannon, to your students for the hard work that they did. And really, mostly, I just wanted to say thanks to all of you guys for being here. It's so, I know we're all on Zoom a lot, I'm sure, but I'm still sort of delightfully surprised when I see all the little people popping up in the grid. So it's magical in its way that we're able to come together in this virtual space. So I appreciate that. And I especially appreciate the opportunity and the privilege to be able to think together about our relationship to our natural world. And this is really a central theme to my practice. And I'm sure that it's really something very central to all of us as we're navigating these challenging times, which I think that actually hold obviously a lot of difficulty, but also a lot of possibility in what, what these times are requiring us to reconsider. So in that spirit, I'm going to share my work with you. I just wanted to say too that, I work with a variety of medium like this. Shannon was mentioning that, I use objects, oral histories, photography, and painting to evoke these entanglements between capitalism, colonialism, and environmental injustice. So it's really that sensibility that things are very much intertwined, and that we're very much part of the places that we are, and we're part of each other. So my aim is really that my works can collaboratively build knowledge across a human and more than human spectrum. And I like to invite viewers to listen to a variety of voices. From ecologists to penguins to whales in the Southern Ocean to residents of the Canadian Arctic. My intention is that I can amplify stories and voices that I think are really necessary as we try to imagine possible futures. And I have longstanding relationships with members of Inuit communities, and I approach these collaborations with humility and with sensitivity to colonial power structures. My practice uses art as a call for the imaginary, and I think of it as a site where proposals from many points of view in the present are part of our future becoming. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to basically show you guys my polar-based work. So in 2008, I was an invited artist with Cape Farewell. It's a British organization to work with scientists and students and artists sailing across the Arctic Circle. And the project was really to cultivate or create a cultural response to climate change. So that was my beginning of the beginning of my direct engagement with the Canadian North. And subsequently, I've sailed the Northwest Passage and spent time in Resolute Bay, and then also sailed the Antarctic Peninsula. So I'm going to start today with a project that I did in 2010. So let me just share my screen here. Okay. Sorry. The other thing is, if you guys want to put the little faces small on the side, then you don't have to, you can just see the images. Okay, so here we go. So this is a project called Place with No Dawn. And in 2010, I made this time-lapse video in collaboration with members of the community in Resolute Bay in the high Canadian Arctic. So Resolute Bay, or Kauseito, literally means place with no dawn in Inuktitut, which is one of the principal Inuit languages. So here I am in the landscape setting up 2 cameras. So that was a 24-hour time-lapse video was made from still shots, 1 picture per camera per minute, taken with 2 cameras simultaneously. So it combines images of the changing landscape with voices and songs of its residents. It's a record of the passage of time, commingling people and place in the seasonal moment when the Arctic is flooded with 24 hours daylight. It speaks to the ecology of people, history, and land. The double images both extend the horizon and refer to the tumultuous political history of Resolute Bay, where people were deported from 2 distinct communities to assert Canadian sovereignty in the region during the Cold War. So while both cameras are situated in the same landscape, each camera has a slightly different point of view, like the 2 communities who were forcibly brought together by deportation. So there's just a map to situate you. It's the 2 communities. It was Inuktitut, if you see my little mouse, and they were brought to Resolute Bay, and the other communities were from Pond Inlet. So I'll just tell you a little bit more about the history of that. In 1953, the government of Canada forcibly relocated Inuit families from Inuktitut in northern Quebec and Pond Inlet in Baffin Island to Resolute Bay because of its strategic geopolitical position. So these families were promised better living conditions and hunting opportunities, and upon arrival, they were separated, they encountered unfamiliar wildlife and difficult hunting. They were left without sufficient supplies of food and materials to make tents or clothing. And they also had to endure 24 hours of darkness during the winter, which the community from Quebec and Inuktitut, they weren't used to that. So that's why it was called Place with No Dawn. So they were told that the families were told that they could be returned home after 2 years if they wished, but this offer was later withdrawn, as it would have compromised Canada's claims to sovereignty in the region. So in August 2010, a few months after the making of this video here, the Canadian government issued a public apology. So I'm not going to show you the video, but I'm just going to show you the stills from the landscape. And if you want the video, you can just Google Vimeo and Place with No Dawn, and you can hear the audio. What I did was I asked people in the village to describe their experience of light. And I spoke with many members of the community, from the mayor to teachers, hunters, students, and scientists. The voices really range across the spectrum. Zipporah Aronson, an elder, she spoke of her nomadic upbringing and her joy. Sorry, and her joy at having grown up on the land. And our Martha Kallick spoke of the value of passing on her knowledge and traditions. I sat in the kitchen of two young sisters, Uluriak and Valerie, while they faced each other cheek to cheek and sang throat songs. They explained that if you're born in the light season, your voice is higher, while if you're born in the dark season, your voice is lower. I spoke with climate scientists and researchers mapping the depths of the ocean floor. And these observations from the community provide the sound for the video, along with Uluriak and Valerie's throat singing. Their stories are inextricably linked to the rhythm of the elements shown in the changing landscape. So the question of colonialism is fundamental to climate change. Ideas of sovereignty are at the core of polar issues. Climate change has provided the precondition for the access to the resources. And in the case of the poles in our environmental state, we really are at the last frontier. And climate issues are directly tied to social justice issues. So in my work, oral history is a way to keep important stories of injustice from being forgotten in our present need to resist colonial attitudes and to search for new ideas of sovereignty, sovereignty of wind, of water, of land. Okay, this next project is titled This Mountain, and it was shown at Amur Gallery in Montreal. So in 2015, I visited Baffin Island again, which inspired this project based on the extraction of its resources. So here we are back up north again. We see there's Resolute Bay, and Pond Inlet was just about here, and this is Baffin Island. So it's a mine site. That's the complex. So the mine, it's called Mary River. The mine at Mary River in North Baffin Island in the Canadian territory of Nunavut is one of the largest iron ore deposits in the world. And during my trip there, an Inuit elder told me in a conversation about the landscape of the mine, he said, "This mountain will soon be gone." And so I began to think about the mountain not as a noun or a static thing, but as an ongoing process of creation, or in this case, destruction. So the exhibition was comprised of Shinkole prints, paintings, and a sound sculpture entitled Rock with No Tongue. And the works invite viewers to engage with natural processes of growth and decay, the slow buildup of a form over time, and its sudden erasure. So here's the sound sculpture, and here's a detail of it. So it's activated by movement. So when the viewers would go close to it, it would turn it into a speaker, and you could hear the recordings of members of the Pond Inlet community discussing changes in their land. So some people describe the mine site where they've worked, while others detail their surroundings, their memories, and the changes that they've noticed. Their voices provide oral testimony to the areas surrounding Pond Inlet. And as viewers listen, they're prompted to conjure up their own perceptions of the landscape, joining their images with the voices. So here's a detail. When the viewer looks at the sculpture, you can see the reflection of the iron ore in the mirror, making a sort of a little mini landscape. And the iron ore rock is the mineral that's being mined, and the steel base is the material that the iron ore is transformed into. The oval is exactly the same size as Picasso's painting Still Life with Chair Caning, a work that included objects from real life for the first time and introduced them into the world of the painting, thereby questioning the nature of representation itself. Here, the real rock is introduced into the picture plane, which in this case is the mirror, creating a new representation that is simultaneously nature culture. So now we're going to listen to a short excerpt of Ruby Katzek speaking. Oh, sorry, that's right here. Okay. Oh, sorry. No. Maybe it's down here. Oh, here it is. Yeah, okay.
It's like middle of Baffin Island. All you could see is nothing but tundra and a big mountain. I don't know if it's still big today, but it was big. Beautiful place. Mount Inlet is a very beautiful place. You could see the ocean from Mount Inlet. You could see narwhals, bunch of big mountains. You see swans, sand cranes, rabbit, foxes, everything. You could see lots of things, even walrus. It was beautiful. And the population was less than 100 when I used to go there. The population is over 300, apparently, in Mount Inlet right now, 2017. I can't imagine what it looks like right now, 7 years later. Bigger than most communities on Baffin Island, near a river. I'm wondering, it's like halfway from a mountain to a hill. That's what I think, 7 years later. But it's a huge mountain because it's too big. It's huge. Beautiful rock, burgundy plum looking. No, maroon, that color, right? My iron ore is that color, around plum or burgundy, or lighter. If I remember right, I think it's one of those colors. The mountain is that color. Yeah.
Okay, so these are the Chincolet prints. Chincolet is a printmaking process that fuses disparate papers together. So this process allowed me to combine fragments of, including my photographs that I took in Baffin Island, and colored paper to make something new with something missing. So it was sort of my way of questioning what is it that we're removing or extracting, what's taken away and what's left. And I've basically removed information and replaced it with color. And in this perceptual fracture, color is interrupting the visual grammar, capturing moments that both reveal and question our relationship to our environment. The abandoned outpost, the iron ore mountain, the disappearing glacier all invite a recall forward. What traces will remain of our present choices? This is called The Name It Is Given. What nations come and go? White horizon. Set in motion. The ore body. Heritage of all. And these are the paintings. So in this image, the gallery view, you can see the scale and the materiality of them. It's a little bit hard to see in here, but the edges are beveled and it reflects the color onto the surface of the wall. And the paintings are really, the colors were inspired very much from the audio. You know how we just heard Ruby talking about the color of the iron ore. So the paintings are made, they're offering a meditation on how something like the earth or a thought is formed through repeated actions over time. So they're made with actions based on natural forces like pierce, break, scorch, alluding to humans as a geological force. So they really are like paintings from the Anthropocene. Their emergent patterns evoke nature, and the compositions are created by the rhythm of their making and through the experience of creating the action. So in some instances, the works reveal the buildup of a form through its collapse or by the way it's barely holding together. So here's this is called It's Older Than You. Beyond Recall. Strangely Prescient. Nothing to Conceal the Darkness. The earth and sky are old friends. until it gives way. Luminous points like stars. How elements move. The flaws that cut through. Migrations. Okay, and then now these are a series of photographs that I took in the North and the South Pole. So these horizon felt photographs are using color to create new cartographies of the polar regions. So using the horizon and colors from the land and animals as points of reference, I placed different colored felt in front of my lens while photographing the North and South Poles. So there's no Photoshop or any manipulation of the image. It's really simply me holding my camera and holding colored felt in front of it and taking the picture. Very low tech. So in this way, the photograph doesn't capture the landscape. So here I am going to these places at the end of the earth that probably, you know, very many people won't go to. I don't know if I'll ever return. And I'm obscuring much of the image. So I'm not taking it, and it creates an image that's largely emptied out. So this intentional withholding serves as a gesture to both question our lack of a long view and defy the act of taking. Abandoned outposts, remote scientific stations, and retreating glaciers speak to the life of places and the storied matter that shapes them. These photographs take stock of the embedded histories of the poles while opening up a space for rethinking the natural. So the colors taken from seaweed, moss, berries, ships, gravestones, seals, flags, they all interrupt notions of an uninhibited white polar space. The convergences between human and beyond human species and spaces reveal that we are embedded in our environment just as much as it is within us. The color interrupts the visual language while simultaneously maintaining, in some cases, a long view. We are implicit in this juxtaposition of viewpoints, as our capacity to think beyond ourselves is central to our collaborative agency in imagining alternative possibilities. I'll just go through the images and read you the titles too. So that was called The Greening. This is called The Left Hand Points Towards Home. Living Memory. The Nearby Far Away. The Place of Many Fish. Perceptible Changes Over Time. North Warning, it's a dew line converted to North Warning System in Cambridge Bay. Return of the Sun. The Persistence of Things. And these are the ones from the South. Ideas and Things. With an Eye of Faith. This is actually of Elephant Island. And the story goes that Shackleton and his crew, after they'd been searching for land and they finally saw a site of land, it was Elephant Island. And there was a crew member of Shackleton's who said, "Oh, with an eye of faith, one can see an elephant." So that's where the title comes from. But it kind of looks like an elephant too, which I think is funny. Loss of profits due to scarcity. Hasty evacuation. This wayward floating body. Colonies. If you look carefully, you can see the little penguins. This one is at Gettysburg right now. The critical zone. Enduring claims. And many kinds of absence. Okay, and now I'm going to share with you the project that Florence saw and that you have some of the objects from in Gettysburg at the Schmucker Art Gallery right now. So the title of the exhibition, The Call of Things, it refers to American political theorist Jane Bennett's work. In her book, Vibrant Matter, Bennett shifts the focus from the human experience of things to the things themselves. And she talks about a vital materiality that runs through and across bodies, both human and non-human. This seemingly simple gesture of acknowledging the agency of objects led to the making of this work, The Call of Things, which emphasizes the active power of materials by bringing everything together. By bringing everything alive through a curated assemblage of things, sounds, and images. So here we are in the exhibition space, and on the pedestals are the things, and then we have some of the photographs too. And it's like creating this space where the things kind of become actors and they relate to each other to kind of sort of point to this complex relationship and history that's sort of created and shaped the polar regions. So the objects work in concert to deepen our understanding of these remote places and how their histories of colonialism and exploitation relate to our current environmental crisis. The exhibition challenges binary concepts of nature, culture, human, non-human, animate, inanimate, and even north-south. Things are agents in their own right, not simply a product of human activity or resources for our use. While human voices are the trigger for the objects to have voice, the work is not anthropomorphic or simply historic. It's a proposal to listen to the call of things, to perceive all matter as alive. And this call travels backwards and forwards between subjects and objects, confounding these very designations. So in the gallery space, you would come across, which if you guys have been able to visit your gallery, you see that there's a QR code, and then you can use your phone and you can listen to audio related to each object. And here's people in the gallery doing that. And I don't know, I'll ask Shannon this after, but what I really loved about this in Montreal is that when people are playing the work, it sort of creates like a soundscape in the space, and it's sort of unpredictable where sound is emerging from. So it sort of has this performative element that I quite enjoyed. So that's the viewer participation. Okay, so here's the image from the website. So you can start to see there's roughly, I think, around 25 objects, but here's a few. So this kind of convergence of objects, you know, the failed scientific instrument, a glass of glacier water, an Eskimo number disc, a live canary. These are just a few of the material consequences of human and beyond human relations. The voices range across a spectrum from whales, glaciers melting, environmentalists, academics, poets, and penguins. This assemblage uses the life of objects to create a political ecology of things and meanings, where we can consider how knowledge is produced across a human and more than human spectrum. Some of the objects speak to the ecological crisis of our present moment through the lens of history, recalling that we have not suddenly found ourselves here, but that we have arrived at this moment through a variety of interventions that privilege the human over other spaces and species. Other voices are testimony to the practice of human supremacy over other humans. So now we'll listen to a few of these objects together. Oh, you can visit the website if you want to, and you can listen to them, you know, at home also. So this is Melted Sea Ice, and it's the voice of Julianne Yip, who describes herself as a non-anthropocentric anthropologist.
Since I guess 2014, I've really done a deep dive into these icy worlds and the conceptual possibilities they open up. And maybe that is a slow, I don't think that this is an instantaneous process of learning to reorder the conceptual coordinates of your world or your thinking. If we have these ideas that humans are special, we're different from the rest of the world. Oh, but now we've pumped so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that we're now threatening all existence, biological existence at least. What does this mean then if we're actually a geological force on par with the orbital tilt of the Earth or tectonic plates? I feel like it's one of those things that is a process, like relearning how to see the world. And so sea ice offers a kind of positioning that decenters human beings. And so what are some of the ways to offer a glimpse of what the world looks like from the perspective of sea ice? Sea ice produces its own time, and that's not reducible to like this diurnal cycle or even the annual cycle. It actually has a time scale that is both shorter than and longer than the annual seasonal cycle, and that's related to basic properties of sea ice, the fact that it takes a while for it to melt and to grow, and that some of those anomalies in thickness or temperature are remembered by the ocean. And that changes how the sea ice grows and decays. And so that has a time scale that's determined, or it belongs or is produced by the ice itself. And that's also different from time that humans make with calendars or clocks. This is a time completely independent of human timekeeping devices. Sea ice also can generate completely different timelines and different realizations of the future. So this ability to produce the future is not exclusive to human beings, and also just inherent to the ice itself as frozen water. It does release in some ways a different temporality. Like as it melts, it's unfolding in time in a certain way that entrains human beings insofar as we're trying to like organize shipping or create policies to combat greenhouse gases.
So this is glacier water, and it's the voice of Kitty Koman-Gapik. She's a resident of Pond Inlet.
It's really soothing to go walking about on the tundras and looking at the mountains and how the mountains have the glaciers, the fresh waters, and how they have a natural waterfalls. And I think it's really beautiful to know your area where you live. And I think the mountains have been there more than I have. They were there when I was born. So I think they've been there a long time. But I noticed the glaciers have not as much as before. I think they're melting away and they're changing. I've noticed every summer, I noticed there's an area, there's no glacier anymore. And the one right in front of us is shrinking.
So here's a plastic bag, and it's the voice of Ivalo Frank, who is a Greenlandic filmmaker.
You know, when you talk about like climate change, you know, you don't really talk about like this whole world that will be uncovered. You also have like, airplanes and things that have fallen from the sky and have been like in the ice for years, and now all this stuff is being uncovered in Greenland in particular. I just think we will have like a lot of history being uncovered as the climate changes as well, and it will be able to tell us a lot about ourselves. So they will definitely get a new life and a new meaning, a very, very new meaning. A lot of these objects were supposed to just be hidden away, you know, they were supposed to disappear. People in general like to make a lot of objects go away when they become unpopular, or they stop like sort of having like obvious effect or use. The same with plastic bags, whatever, you know, people just like to use stuff and then throw it away, you know. And I think at the moment it's quite interesting how like objects are sort of like, it's almost like they're fighting against us, you know. When you speak about climate change at the moment, it's very much up in the news, you know, like how this whole like world of plastic, etc., is completely coming back to haunt us, you know. So we're like fighting against this like massive animal that is completely unstoppable, you know, and we've created it ourselves. Really like, you know, a little bit like uncontrollable, and we're addicted to it, and we keep using it, you know, and it keeps surfacing, you know, and we cut up like whales, and it's in the stomach. It has many many shapes and forms and many powers. I don't think we are so aware of. So I think it's a little bit like also like talking about creation. You know, when you create something, you know, like you to have an awareness about what you create, and to create with consciousness from both like when you make a film, but also whatever you create. And I think at the moment, you know, it seems like there's a beginning to be a new awareness about like creation, about like what it is we put into the world.
So this is an object from the Cold War. And it's a nice follow-up for Ivalo talking about how climate change is, we think about things so much disappearing, but this idea of things appearing is a kind of a different flip, that as things are melting, there's objects in the ice and the snow that will appear. So this is one of those such objects. That's courtesy of Grant Dean from Scripps Institute of Oceanography and, of course, the glacier. Here is a 1958 Dewline magazine, and it's the voice of Matt Farish, who's the author of The Contours of America's Cold War.
The Dewline was an enormous defensive radar network that was built by the United States Air Force with the help of many, many partners, including Canadian contractors, and certainly the tacit and sometimes the explicit support of the Canadian military and the Canadian government across the North American Arctic, from Alaska to Greenland, essentially, in the 1950s. It's built in the early years of the Cold War, and this is a moment where this polar region was understood or widely treated as a gateway, essentially, for Soviet planes, first and foremost, carrying nuclear weapons. And so you see the line, which is thousands of kilometers long. It's not a physical line, but it's a set of radar stations. The numbers differ, but 60-ish stations, small and larger. Some staffed, some almost entirely automated. That is this manifestation of both the kind of geopolitical fear characteristic of that period, but also this hubris, a technological belief that the North could be tamed or overcome through, modern technology. The Arctic has yet again entered all sorts of complicated geopolitical discussions. One question that remains is this kind of long tail of the Dewline's history, both its return in the present in this era of increased interest in the North from the South, but also the long arc of, the slow pollution of the North, contamination of the North, alongside other similar sorts of projects that left this environmental stain on the region. It's also a history of the sort of buried or slow violence that's dispersed and hard to identify, that's in the bodies of people to some degree through contaminants, in the memories of people who, are either told, or if their elders are remembering the moment when, the US military showed up and started to build a runway across the bay from their community, and the consequences that this had for local people. So I do think that the sort of echoes are strong, even today.
So this is an Eskimo number disc, and is the voice of Okalika former chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council.
My own Eastern Arctic number was E71865, E standing for Eastern Arctic. So there was Western Arctic Inuit who had their own numbers, and they started with the letter W for the Western Arctic. So we up until like very early 1970s, between 1950 and 1970s, Inuit were identified as only numbers for the administrators, so-called administrators for the government. So that is some of our small history where the government of the day did not recognize Inuit as having our own names. And since they couldn't say them, they started to hand out identification numbers to identify us as E71865. I remember a visit to the hospital, going to see the doctor, being called, the doctor or the nurse calling for me by saying my number. Inuit name our kids after people significant to us or significant to the community. My first name is Josie, who was my grandmother, who I never met because she was sent down to Hamilton when they found out that she had TB, and she never came back. She's buried in the Chinese section of one of the cemeteries with just her E7 number as an identifier, with 2 or 3 other Chinese, one on top of each other. My name Okaluk is after my mother's mother, so I'm named after the 2 maternal grandmothers.
So there's a long list of collaborators on that project, and you can actually access all of the audio from that website, thecalloftthings.net. So, and of course, go visit them and see the objects at the gallery too. Okay, so here's the website. I'm just going to show very quickly one little last project, and this is called Letters to the Future, and it's basically a time capsule. Well, let's say, I asked poets, indigenous leaders, artists, scientists, environmental activists, and other prominent contemporary thinkers to write a handwritten message to the future, which I put into a time capsule that was then buried in the Dronning Maud-land ice sheet by Alain Hubert, who is the founder of the International Polar Institute and the operator at the Princess Elizabeth Antarctic Station, the world's first zero-emission scientific station. So that's where it's located. And the time capsule will emerge in roughly 1,000 years after being carried by the ice to the sea. And this estimate is based on in situ measurements of velocity by Hubert and his colleagues. So no one from the present time except the authors themselves has read the letters. The contributors sent them to me in a closed envelope with their signatures over the seal. And then I documented the letters. So this is from Rosie Braidotti, who is a feminist philosopher and professor at Utrecht University and the author of the Posthuman and Posthuman Knowledge. This is Okalek Ajiasik, who we just listened to, and there you see her E71865 number on her signature. Roshi Joan Halifax, who's a Buddhist and an ecologist. Anne Michaels, a Canadian author of Fugitive Pieces. Arvo Part, the composer. Maya Pindak, an artist and a poet. Rosenclair, artists. Carlo Rovelli, a theoretical physicist and author of The Order of Time. Gavin Schmidt, climate scientist and director of NASA Goddard Center for Space Studies. This is what the capsule looked like. So it was basically its design. It's an interesting challenge because it had to be something that could sustain the pressure of the ice, but also float. So it does both of those things. There it's engraved, so all the letters are inside there, and then on the back was the engraving of all the contributors. Here's the site. Here's Alain Hubert drilling the hole, putting in the capsule, and that's the ice hole where the letters are buried. Okay, so there, that's what I have to share with you guys today. I'm really happy for any questions. And I know I took a little bit longer than I was meant to, so sorry about that. But
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. There are a couple of questions that came through the chat. I have a couple of questions, but while I'm reading these, if you all want to, if anyone else wants to chime in, please feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand, and I'll make sure that you are heard. So our first question was about if you could define, if you or maybe explain a little bit more how the sovereignty of the wind is defined. That the question says it's an interesting concept, but if you could say a little bit more about what you meant about the sovereignty.
What I mean about that is like the question of sovereignty is this thing where we take lines and we draw them around borders and we make countries according to different criteria and political, geopolitical decisions. And so what I'm saying is, what would it look like if we were to give sovereignty to wind, to water, to the elements of the earth, if we were not, if we were maybe a little more aware and tuned in of the fact of how things are actually crossing over borders all the time. And I think this pandemic is especially indicative of that situation, where we are very intent on creating what we, insulated geopolitical areas, but we're not protected by the situation that we're in. And the situation that we're in is really requiring us to think much more in a much more global way around how we're interconnected. So I think the wind is like a perfect example right now. It's the air that we're breathing, and it's the water that we're drinking, and it's the understanding that we are not, just like we're not separate entities from each other, we're not separate entities from our place, and our countries are not separate entities divided by borders. So that's really what that comment is about.
Thank you. And I'm gonna just jump in and say Maddie Debbie has her hand raised. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, yeah, less of a question, more of a compliment. I really liked when you had talked about how climate change has like affected things differently, and how you said that things were coming up, like surfacing more. I'd never really thought about that. I guess when I always thought about climate change, it was like stripping things away from what we knew. But when you mentioned the artifacts from World War I coming to the surface, just wasn't a point that I'd ever learned about in school. So I thought that was really neat.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I want to compliment you too. That was a wonderful, wonderful talk. And I want to get to another question that popped up in the chat box. This is a question about the population of Resolute Bay and if it's becoming a stopover point in the navigable Northwest Passage.
Yeah, I mean, the Resolute, not just Resolute Bay, but Pond Inlet, and a lot of northern communities are seeing a lot more traffic from ships, not only ships like, related to the mine, but also, quite frankly, the tourist industry. And those ships are affecting the communities and also the animals, the migration patterns. And so that's quite a big issue, actually. It's such a difficult conversation question, because of course there's a benefit of the opening up of the north, and there's also all of the problems that go with it. And Resolute Bay is kind of a special place in that it has a military base as well as having a scientific base as well as having a community. The community population is quite small. There's only around 300 people there, but there's a big influx of other, the military and the scientists that are also sort of like temporary communities.
Thanks. And this is a question, I'm excited to see a student's question. Was there any place that inspired you in your art the most?
I mean, it's hard to say, because I think that there's been so many places. I studied in Italy, and Italy is like a home art place for me. But I think that being in the Arctic really sensitized me to our natural world in a way that was quite poignant, and in particular the question of light and our relationship to the sun, and also the social justice issues around the history of that place, but of really all of our places, and how our history is not just like that object is, even if it's in the ice, it's still there. And that maybe now we might be able to see more of those objects, but those objects exist whether we can see them or not. So I think I feel the same way about history, that, you know, we're not just suddenly here in a climate catastrophe, in a global pandemic. I mean, in, you know, issues of race, and they're not just all of a sudden, whoa, what happened? It's that we've come to this situation through the ways that we, you know, have been. And I think that it's like about seeing that history is actually with us, just as much as those objects are with us.
I have a question about, and again, please, if any of you want to raise your hand, go ahead and do so, or like I said, type in the chat box. I have a question about the challenges of your collaborations. And if you could say a little bit more about, I mean, it sounds like it's extraordinarily rewarding, and it's really remarkable that you've been able to incorporate so many diverse voices. But if there's maybe a story you can share about what the challenges have been about collaborations, either with the indigenous people or with, you know, finding the scientists, or.
Yeah, it is interesting to, well, finding the scientists to deploy the time capsule took a couple of years. And I'm really grateful for Alain Hubert for his generosity and willingness to, you know, to believe in that idea. So that was really quite exceptional. And then there's just a lot that goes into it. That's, you know, in terms of just communicating and following up and, you know, making things happen. I think there's a lot there. I feel like overall the question around collaboration, you know, with Indigenous communities has been really you know, it's something that I've thought a lot through and felt my way a lot through, and had a lot of questions about, well, I'm white, what does it mean? Who am I? And how is it appropriate for me to engage, and what would be relevant? And, you know, really examining my own colonial attitudes and having to really reckon with assumptions that I've found myself making that I didn't realize, or, you know, a whole onslaught of different kind of mental structures that have been operating, you know, all the time. I think that it's like a daily practice to undo colonialism and be aware of just how many, you know, thoughts that we have all the time that are really related to structures that are not actually helpful to our future being. So, you know, I feel like in that way, my work is actually, you know, part of my practice, a larger practice of just, you know, trying to be a human being with other human beings in the planet in a, in a positive way.
I have another question. And again, I don't want to step on toes or take too much time. Again, please feel free to, everyone else, chime up. But the titles of your photographs are so beautiful, and you had mentioned the significance of the one title to Shackleton. But I was wondering if you could say more about, again, about the titles, and they're so like literary and poetic and narrative.
Yeah, the titles are really important, and I think that because they're so abstract that, you know, the titles in my work in general are important to locate the ideology of where the work is coming from, and also the site-specific nature of the place. So really almost all of the titles have some reference to, you know, either the history or maybe a book that I've read, or like the Nearby Faraways from Rebecca Solnit's book, or Hasty Evacuation is because that was a crazy place because it was an active volcano that was then a whaling station. And the volcano erupted, and everyone from the whaling station just had to hastily evacuate. And when I was there, you know, you saw all these falling down structures and like toothbrushes, and just like really literally you just felt like, wow, everybody just left, you know. So that title comes from that place, for example. But I read a lot, and I think a lot about it, all the different places, so that basically informs the titles. But I think there's a question too about language, you know, and about language that can have a poetic quality, and what the image and the text can do together in the mind of the viewer. That is also at play there, and trying to find language that is open-ended enough that can maybe make a question or an opening of a question in when looking at the work, as opposed to kind of describing it too much or closing it down.
Yeah, and it reminds me too of the issues, I mean, basically the issues of colonization and naming places, right, that are already named. If you showed the map of, you know, Hudson, calling Hudson Bay, and also how that relates to the name, you know, the naming of someone with a number, and the kind of taking away of a name and replacing that with this, you know, Eskimo identification tag, and the power structures in play, and naming, mapping,
Yeah.
calling something.
Yeah, and what kind of ideology that comes out of, you know, in terms of, you know, just thinking about other ways of being able to even think that aren't necessarily so much about drawing lines around things and making nouns, but, you know, things that are more operative or more in process, or again, back to that question of the wind, or, you know, something that's dynamic or in flux, or that you can't quite pin down. I mean, I think that's the nature of our conundrum, is that we're really changing all the time, and things are really always moving. And so, but at the same time, like, we're constantly trying to like pin it down. And I think that's just, it's tiring and it's difficult, you know, for us human beings sometimes, I think that way.
Yeah. And one more question. Did you have plans before the pandemic to keep traveling, either up north or to the south?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to go to Finland because I have an exhibition there, and I was hoping to engage with communities in Finland, but you know, it's not a good time for traveling, and it's a very good time to be very grounded in where one is. And I think that relationship, I was thinking as I was re-listening to the works about this kind of simultaneous thing, like of Kitty, when she was talking about the glacier melting, and I was like, oh, that, like, feeling like her voice and the spaciousness in her voice, and the way she was talking about the glacier melting, and at the same time she was talking about the beauty of being in your place and taking a walk outside. And she said, I think it's really special to know your place. And I was thinking about that, like, it is just to be where one is, wherever we all are respectively, but to have that feeling of, you know, knowing your place. I think there's something very profound about that, you know, as a practice and as a way of relating to and being where we are.
Yeah, and it's really the only solution to
I think so.
the restrictions and limitations that we have, is that instead of being able to escape, about recognizing where you are.
Yeah, acknowledging it. And I think that's also, and discussing it and talking about it, and also feeling like, you know, being able to look clearly at, you know, the situation that we're in, but also feel like there's actually a lot of possibilities. I mean, there's so many wonderful and amazing, inspiring proposals that are occurring in this time. And there's another contributor, we didn't listen to him today, but Richard Alley, and he's a glaciologist, and he said in his thing, he said that it's like we're at the most amazing time, like we have the most knowledge of sustainability that we've ever had before. Like, the possibilities are really incredible with what we know now. So I'd like to think about that too, and about, you know, that it's so much is actually positive and possible. And we're in a special moment to be able to really reflect on these things. I think that this pandemic is really asking us, you know, to take the time to slow down and to actually just think about things a little bit and feel them.
Well, thank you. I think that's a really nice place to end it, and we're a little bit past 5. So thank you all for coming. I hope you'll tune in again on October 21st. And again, if you have any questions or would like a catalog, please send a note to me in the chat. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon, either virtually or in person.